I freaking love going through games played at the top levels. I like going through older games. I just feel like there's so much to pull out, even smaller moments from these games. So uh, I'm really excited about this one. This one is a bit flashier of a game. This is not a positional slow. No, this is absolute crazy destruction. And so that'll probably be like two good phases to going through this game. One, talking about the opening a little bit, and then right into the action, right into it. So let's jump in. This is Hans Niemann against Yagiz Erdogmus, who Erdogmus had a great tournament at the Grand Swiss. Hans, I was following his games. I was cheering for him. So I think this was a fantastic game. This was the most exciting, most interesting to watch of Hans's games throughout the entire event. So the thing that was probably the most surprising about this game is actually the opening. Hans played the Petrov. Now, I'm not an E4, E5 player myself, but even I know that these lines tend to be very drawish. I was checking the Masters database on chess.com, and it was around a 45% draw rate. Now, very normal statistics for a lot of openings is probably closer to like 33% draws. So 45 is actually a pretty solid increase from what I believe and what I've seen to be a bit more of the standard for most mainline variations. So Hans likely pushing for a win. He's the higher rated player. He has the white pieces, but he decides to go with Petrov. And I can only imagine he had some absolute nasty prep lined up, ready to go. So the opening, nothing too crazy at this point. Like it all seems pretty standard. Part of the reason I do think the Petrov does end up being a bit more drawish is you get some of the symmetrical pawn structure with a lot of potential trading kind of on the horizon. But it was actually Erdogmus that was the one who mixed it up first. He played bishop g4. Now, the more standard approach is bishop e7. In the 3,000 games in chess.com's database that were played here previously, 2,600 of them were bishop e7. Only about 400 of them were bishop g4. So I don't know at this point who outprepared who. It's Hans decided to go into this line, but Erdogmus is the one kind of mixing it up with bishop g4. This is one of the fascinating things I find about these opening battles at the top level is their battles. It's back and forth. I'm trying to surprise you. You're trying to surprise me. Where does that lead? Well, here it leads to a very interesting situation. Was Hans unaware of bishop g4? I don't know. He spent about 7 minutes on his next move, 7-8 minutes. So it seems perfectly possible that bishop g4 was either he wasn't aware of it or he smelled something. And when I say he smelled something, like stockfish at home smell, you know, that Erdogmus played bishop g4 very quickly, maybe has some nasty stuff on the horizon that Hans feels like, okay, I want to avoid. Now, something interesting happens here. The main move by not an insane margin, but definitely the most played move here is c4. And this the most high profile games from this goes back to, well, and just in this line in general is actually Kasparov versus Karpov. Um, they had games played here from this position where they played in 1984, 1985, and 1986. Kasparov and Karpov played different games in this position, so some back and forth on their part, but they all ended in draws, so nothing too crazy. But the c4 played most common move, but does seem to, while still be played, maybe be a little out of fashion. Black has a couple of options here. Knight f6, which is what Karpov played against Kasparov when they reached this position. And this, what seems to me, although I'm not an expert on this, to be a more new move, bishop e7. And I just, some craziness that I think you could expect. Obviously, Erdogmus was ready for it. I mean, you see the time on his clock. He has not, he's playing on increment. They started with an hour and 40 minutes, and he's above it. So he was definitely ready for this. And Hans decides to play c3. Now, again, I cannot tell you if this was prep. I cannot tell you if he came up with this at the board. But the thing that really interests me about this c3 move is something that I feel like has been my change in perspective with openings, where there's power in just having a plan. And what I mean by that is when a lot of us, we work on openings, we go to a course, we go to Stockfish, we go to our favorite content creator. And what do we look to do? Well, we look to just have them tell us what to do. I've been guilty of this. I played some very theoretical openings in my time, and I've definitely had times that I'm like, all powerful Stockfish, please tell me what to do. But there is a certain power in not just memorizing, but actually understanding, actually having plans. And so c3, was it prep? Was it something Hans came up at the board? I don't know. But he has sort of this simple direction of some queen b3 ideas, some queen a4 ideas, some bishop b5, just headed in the direction of putting pressure over on the queen side. Now, he also could continue some very simple development. Obviously, he did defend against knight d4, which with this knight being pinned is nice. So maybe a couple of ways he could have taken it, but he just is going to have a plan. You know, he's just going to develop his pieces. He's going to put some pressure. He's going to look for these right opportunities to attack on the light squares and doesn't go for theory. Now, obviously, I think the ideal is somewhere in between, that you have some basis of what you're doing in the opening and some understanding. But I will say from personal experience, understanding for most levels, I'm not saying at the very top. This does not include like the super grandmasters, but from, and I don't know, maybe I'm not a super grandmaster, so they could correct me on that. But from what I've seen, for most levels, let's say under 2000, understanding triumphs over theory. If you know where you're placing your pieces, how you're creating threats, how you're breaking through, that tends to beat memorized prep. Because if I understand the position, well, as soon as we get out of theory, as soon as we get out of preparation, I'm going to know what to do. As soon as you get out of preparation, if all you did is memorized, you're going to have no idea what to do. And you're going to have to try and figure it out at the board. So some back and forth here, and we kind of see this. Erdogmus, it feels like out-prepared Hans, but maybe he could have spent a little bit more time just understanding what should be the next steps for him in something that is very calm. I'm sure he has a very good idea against c4. And obviously, something like c3 is hard to predict, so it's a trap any one of us could fall into. But it becomes very evident very quickly that while he was well prepared, theoretically, he wasn't well prepared and understanding of this position. And why I say that, well, look at the time. Look at that time spending. One move out of his prep as an absolute brilliant player over 2600, he took 21 minutes. So as a good player and taking that much time, it feels pretty clear to me, one move out of prep, that he didn't actually understand the position. He didn't fully know what his plan should be. And it becomes a bit of a struggle. So for those that are working or looking at, okay, what do I do on openings? Really, yes, you can have your setup. You can memorize some moves, memorize some variations. But honest to goodness truth, work on understanding where am I placing my pieces, how am I creating threats, where am I breaking through. Work on understanding some of those questions, and it will be so much more valuable, because you don't want to find yourself in this situation where your opponent plays one relatively simple move, c3, and you're already kind of struggling on what to do. Now, the time spending actually, I believe, is just the direction he wanted to take it. F5 is a very committal move and strongly signifies that he's going to be looking for some potential attack on the king side. That is very committal, because if all that's happening on the king side, then the king doesn't want to go there. The king's likely going to go there. And you compare that to maybe just playing something like bishop d6 and trying to castle, very different situation. So Erdogmus spent some time thinking about it, thinking through the different setups. He decides that he likes f5, and honestly, he's correct. This is, from what I can see, the top move here. So he took the time, and he did find it a correct one, because he is a very good player and took it in this direction. But obviously, this leads to a fight. And a fight very quickly. Hans puts the queen on a4. Now, already that commitment was pretty locked in, that he was willing to castle on the queen side, because queen b3, hitting the 2 pawns, he absolutely is planning on playing a very nice defense to a fork. A fork when he's attacking 2 pawns and you use castling, the one move where you get to move 2 pieces to defend against it, is pretty clever. But Hans decides to go for queen a4 and focus a little bit more pressure here, as well as on a7. Now, Erdogmus continues castling queenside, which feels reasonable. He could have played bishop d6, but he spent a lot of time calculating it and decides to go for it. Now, it is worth noting, I kind of skipped over this, but it is worth noting, while he's committing himself to castling queenside, the mistake that may not be a mistake is here. Again, I'm going to point out the time spending, 40 minutes to play queen f6. And while it is, again, the best move, it's going to cost him. That type of time spending, as this game continues, makes it very tough. Puts a lot of pressure on him. And it's definitely not, you definitely don't want to be in a situation you're down 50 minutes against your opponent on the clock. So, yeah, it is a question. And I already talked about this so much, so I'm going to move on. Is this good preparation or is this bad preparation? He, in theory, out-prepped Hans, but look at the time spending and you kind of wonder. Okay, so castle queenside, now bishop d6, bishop b5. He takes on d2, correct. Force that knight to drop back because Hans does not want to allow bishop takes f3. And f4, continuing with everything he's been doing. And, you know, it's one of those things that is so tough when you commit yourself like this. It is almost impossible, as I'm attacking you, you're attacking me, to calculate it all the way through, because what we're looking potentially 5-10 moves down the line, of course these players are going to do their best to calculate, but fully figuring it out in this back and forth is tough. Now, the one thing I will say that I do like about what Erdogmus is doing, I mean, these moves are technically good, but it's also consistency. One of the things that I think some people fall into, and it's tough because there are other chess principles that almost seem conflicted to it. But what I see some people do is this back and forth. They head in this direction to go for this attack, and then they don't really like it, so they head in this direction and go for this attack, and then they don't like that, so they head, you know, the back and forth. And it's easy to lose a lot of time, as well as sort of lack coordination amongst your pieces when you're inconsistent. So I do like from Erdogmus, he's kept some good consistency. He's put his pieces over on the king side. There's potential for the other ones to hop in there very quickly too. And all around, this has worked out really nicely for him to lead to a potentially very interesting game. Now, I do want to just throw in there quickly, well, what are the times maybe we are a little inconsistent? Defending is one of them, where we might move our pieces to one side away from the attack we were doing because we have to, because our opponent's attack is very dangerous. But the other time is we attack on this side, our opponent moves their pieces on that side, and then we kind of switch gears and go to the other side, right? So Hans has deployed sort of a, well, I'm going to ignore you and do what I'm doing type strategy. And so the consistency makes sense, right? He went for this attack. Hans is not moving pieces over there to defend. So he continues the consistency, continues attacking where his pieces are. That makes a lot of sense. As opposed to if Hans had dropped everything on that side, and maybe you think like, okay, there could be a little bit of shift. So we see that both people just kind of committing to their attack, trying to keep consistent with it, trying to keep pressure, and the battle starting. Hans plays rook e1, brings his rook ready to fight, ready to kind of help control some squares, and Magnus goes for f3. Now, this is marked as an inaccuracy, but honestly, it's very difficult to fully understand why. Now, the reason it's technically not good is because Hans has an opportunity now to play bishop takes c6. Now, previously, queen takes c6 was always sort of possible as a defense. And if you take on a7, then the king actually has an escape square, and I can just continue to attack you. But with the f3 push, queen takes c6 no longer is good, because I will accept this trade. And okay, double pawns, but you can't really attack them. That's not why it's bad. No, the bad part is this f3 pawn is now going to fall. We don't take it right away because we don't want to ruin our structure. We actually play h3, bishop h5, g4, kick that bishop away. Knight takes f3 is happening, and white's just going to be up a pawn with a semi-decent structure. So because of that, because the f3 pawn is pushed, queen takes c6 is no longer a defense, and so bishop takes c6 is possible. Now, why this is more complicated than you might think is because f takes g2 is what I believe both players were thinking about when it came to bishop takes c6. F takes g2, giving up the knight, just saying, go for it, and I'm going to try and checkmate you, right? Your king is opening up. It's very dangerous, and it's a fair point. This actually is very dangerous. There is a downside to having almost no defenders when your king is being attacked. You need defenders. So there's some truth to it. But the sneaky part about this, and why Hans could have gone for this, is his own attack with knight b3 actually ends up being stronger. Bishop d6, and this absolute insane move, rook e5. Now, if you've seen this game before, you actually might think this idea is not too crazy, and we're going to see some similar things later. Not to spoil too much, but absolutely brilliant. You know, bring the knight to b3, sacrifice the exchange to defend as well as open up this capture on g4, and bishop takes b7, and black is crying and getting checkmated and so many things. Yeah, it's just absolute wild variation. I understand why Erdogmus maybe wasn't as worried about it, and Hans maybe didn't play bishop takes c6. Now, the other thing that could have prevented Hans from taking, and this is a very tricky thing in chess, is good, better, best, right? Sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish between 2 or 3 good moves and decide what is best. And Hans here, I mean, as we're going to see, I think probably saw a lot of those ideas with bishop takes c6, but sort of felt like playing h3 first is better. Let me kick this bishop back, give the king a little bit of space. It makes a lot of sense, The only issue with h3 and why it also is inaccurate is now f takes g2. F takes g2 is an option. Yeah. Yeah. F takes g2. Just leave the bishop. Wasn't using it anyways. Very tough move to play. And it's very tough because after h takes g4, it feels like, well, I was just generous and what's the point? I don't have a lot of pieces to attack. But you kind of do, and it happens very quickly. Queen h4 is threatening queen h1 checkmate. So king takes the pawn, gets rid of the pawn that would protect the mate. Now bishop d6. And suddenly queen h2 is on the horizon. And if you prevent that, then rook f8 is on the horizon. And now the f2 pawn is a problem. And if you protect that, then you're just getting absolutely wrecked on all the squares and the queen's jumping in. And have mercy. Have mercy. And yeah, something like king h2, trying to keep this knight protected instead of dropping back and allowing capture, runs into rook f5. Calm yourself. All from f takes g2. So a very, very difficult move because black sort of goes into this attack with not much, but because he can continually create threats that bring another piece into the game, it becomes very, very dangerous. And in fact, white shouldn't take. White should not take on g4. He should take on c6. And once again, go for his own attack with knight b3. Now, this does pose the question, well, how do I know? How do I know when to go for my own attack and when I need to defend? The easy answer is calculation. Think moves ahead, consider the forcing moves, and calculate. But one trick that I think a lot of title players do that could be very helpful in this situation is basically the planning of a few moves. I don't know if that's a good name for it, but it's what if I had 3 moves? So me, I don't care about my opponent for a second. I get 3 moves, and I'm going to attack my opponent. What does that look like? And you could do the same for them. Okay, they get a few moves. I'm not playing anything. What does that look like? But the thing is, when you think about a plan as if you had 3 free moves, or 3 to 5 free moves, when you think of a plan that way, so you're in the planning stages and you're looking at the attack, it can really help in understanding how dangerous the plan is. So for white, you can see some of these ideas with queen a6 or knight c5 and rook e5, trying to distract the bishop. And you can see, okay, if I get 3 moves, that's checkmate. That's dangerous. If black gets a few moves, that's also dangerous. So wait a second. You just told me to think a few moves ahead for me and then a few moves for my opponent. That's a good way to gauge the plan, but that doesn't really help in this position. Well, actually, sort of does, because white comes with check. So his third move is going to be a check, already engaged, and it's white's move. So if both are kind of happening, they're both getting some very big issues for the opponent in 3 moves. Well, who's winning in the attacking game? White feels like they might be. So that could be a good sign that the direction is at least good. Now, obviously, that doesn't solve all the problems. This position, technically, according to computers, equal, which is ridiculous. Equal. It's ridiculous. But I at least know as white that even though black's attack looks scary, that I also have an attack that's fairly scary. And through knight b3 in that direction, there's some danger. So you will never escape calculation unless you just want to guess. And then, yeah, sometimes you'll get lucky. You have to calculate. You have to think moves ahead. But sometimes just, okay, I'm going to forget about my opponent. I'm going to think a few moves ahead for me can really help in saying, okay, I do have some dangerous ideas if I get it going, and help you know that the plan you're thinking about is not completely ridiculous. And then you combine that with calculation and you're in a good spot. So f takes g2, just some absolute wildness, craziness, all that. Or Dogmas doesn't go for it and instead plays bishop h5, which feels so natural. Just move the bishop back. What has changed? What has changed? Well, all those ideas with bishop takes c6, yeah, they're alive and well, except it's even better now because all those moves with knight b3 and rook e5, bishop takes c6, all that, it's the same, except there's a bishop now that's possibly hanging against a rook on e5, on h5. And all I will say about this is people will tell you to think about the forcing moves, the checks, the captures, and the threats. Do not forget about threats. A simple threat, and that's what this is. Rook on e5 now hits the bishop on h. It's a simple threat. Can be so valuable. And is the case here. So Hans goes for this stuff with rook e5. Again, simple threat. But that one simple threat, that gaining of a move, forcing the queen to g6, which honestly, I don't think it really wants to be. It was quite happy on f6, hitting all the squares you possibly could have asked for. But that one threat, and now just really solidifying the position, means this position is completely lost for black, just like that. So we're about to get into some absolute fantastic brilliancies, sacrificing. We're going to see Hans convert this in a fantastic way. But with all of this, I just want to emphasize, do not underestimate one simple threat. In the midst of absolute craziness and attacking and all that, this rook e5 does shine as just a pain. The rook is well placed on e5. The bishop is a bit annoying to defend. Because I'll also point out g6 isn't that simple, with g4 possibly trapping this bishop. As well as that's still a move. Like I'm still gaining a move, and the rook on e5 is useful as bishop g5 will open up. So do not underestimate it. Very valuable. Queen g6, g3, bishop d6, and here we get to the fireworks, the fun, the good times. Hans sacrifices. That's right. The rook, knight b3, leave the rook on e5, because all these ideas with knight c5 and queen a6 are that destructive. Her Dogmas not willing to fall for it, plays rook f8, bishop e3. Okay, I hyped up bishop e3 too much. It's a solid move. It opens up the rook. It develops the bishop. It's just a solid move. It's not that impressive. Still good. And here's where the fun begins. Hans now with a slightly more active position. Pieces developed. He goes for it. Queen takes c6. Another brilliancy as the rook is still hanging. Queen a8, knight c5. But he's not taking. He's still not taking on e5. Before knight c5, queen a6 was looking awfully like checkmate. Now Hans is just saying, well, good luck. Your king is on e7. My knight, queen, and bishop are ready to attack you. Rook also right there. And that is exactly what happens. Queen f5. And bishop g5, sacrificing, well, kind of sacrificing the bishop, but bringing the bishop into the game. He actually just can't take it because that is a checkmate there. Queen e6, queen d7. Sadly, even bishop f6, giving up the queen is still checkmate in two, because of course we don't take the queen. We play rook e1, and then however you block it, it's going to be a checkmate. Yeah, queen d7 actually. We still don't take the queen, which is super savage. Or Dogmas, he's playing on just increment. He's super low on time. He plays rook f6. D takes e5. Queen can now take as queen e6, and then queen d7. Checkmate has been guarded by the rook on f6, but very quickly it becomes obvious that Hans is going to end up material. Dogmas actually resigned here. It seems like g takes f6, but rook e1 on the horizon, and Yeah, it's some problems with the queen and knight e6. He could try to avoid it, but the queen forces the king still to go over, and knight e6 wins. Incredible, wild, adventurous game. And all I again would pose for this game is this moment back with c3. Hans feels like maybe was out prepared, but Hans found a plan. He stuck to it. He followed through with it very well, and that ended up overpowering Erdogmus, who maybe didn't have quite as good of a feel or understanding of how he should go about this position. Now, to his credit, he still played very, very well. This was a good direction to go into, but it cost him a lot of time. And honestly, I think the amount of time that it cost him could have been a huge part of what led to him losing, because as we saw, so many complications, you need so much time to work through them, and Erdogmus just didn't have it, eventually leading to Hans able to clinch the victory. So hope you all learned something from this game. Hans, absolute fantastic play in the Grand Swiss. It is fantastic to learn from. I hope to catch you all next time, and thank you for watching.